The next unit is about two important, let's say, mechanisms for learning. The first mechanism is activating prior knowledge, and the second mechanism is practice. Okay, we first move to the importance of activating prior knowledge. Here I present a statement made by David Ausubel already back in 1968, which is still, I think, one of the most important statements made in the domain of educational psychology. And that's how it starts. If I had to reduce all of educational psychology to just one principle, I would say this: the most important single factor influencing learning is what a learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach him accordingly. What does this mean? It has to do with the idea that knowledge is basically a matter of a network of nodes, and that learning is extending this network of nodes. Imagine that you learn something completely new in a domain in which you're not familiar. Then you create a sort of new network in your head, and this network represents all you learn in this new particular topic or domain you are exploring. Now, if this new network stands on its own and is not related to what you already know, to the existing network, then you will never be able to access the new network, because the existing network is the place where you, let's say, dig into your existing knowledge and try to find something you have learned, which is stored there in that network. Now, new networks have to be connected to the existing network of knowledge in order to be able to access this new knowledge. Therefore, relevant pieces of the existing knowledge have to be activated whenever you start to learn something new, because this activated part of your knowledge network is where the new knowledge is stored and connected to. And therefore, this activation thing is so important. And learners have to activate a particular piece of their knowledge network in order to be able to connect new information to that particular piece of their knowledge network. That's the first thing, and we have an example which does show the relevance of activating prior knowledge. It's an example based on the research by Adriaan de Groot, one of the most important Dutch educational psychologists, who studied the way master chess players and novice chess players do operate and think in a chess match. And he compared De Groot these two kinds of players in order to find out what makes a master chess player so exceptional. So what he did was he took a number of pieces and put them on a chessboard. And these pieces had to be studied by the participants in his research. And after, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes, he put away the pieces and asked the participant to take all the pieces and put them on their places on the board where they were located before removing them. So the participant had to learn the position of the chess pieces by heart. Now imagine that you just simply put the pieces in a random order on the board. Then it's very difficult to remember the individual positions of the pieces because there is no relationship between the pieces. Adriaan de Groot did that and compared the performance of novice chess players with master chess players, and there was no difference. They were not different in the number of pieces they reproduced during the test phase after having observed the board for a particular time. Okay. Now the next step, the next step Adriaan de Groot undertook was taking, let's say, a pattern of pieces from an existing match, which was, let's say, described in the literature. So he put the pieces on their place similar to what had been described in this book about the particular match. And then again, he compared the performance of master chess players with novice chess players. You can imagine that the master chess players were far better in reproducing this meaningful arrangement of pieces on the board compared with the novice players. The master players recognized the pattern of positions. They recognized this as part of a particular game they already had been studying. So they saw what the relationship between the pieces was, and therefore they could easily reproduce the chess pieces on the board. Now here you see the difference and the relevance and the importance of activating prior knowledge, because this prior knowledge helped the master chess players to perform in a superior way compared with the novice chess players who did not dispose of this prior knowledge. Okay, this is an example, as I said, of the importance and relevance of activating prior knowledge. Now the second issue I want to discuss here as an important mechanism of learning is the importance of practice. Now, John Anderson was one of the first who took, let's say, findings from the domain of psychomotor learning to the domain of cognitive skill acquisition, and he, let's say, translated the steps which were already known from this motor learning to the domain of skill learning. The three steps: the cognitive stage, the associative stage, and the autonomous stage. Let me try to describe these three stages. Imagine that you have to learn to play a piece of music on the piano. You have this music in front of you, a sheet, a score, and you see the notes depicted on the sheet. Now you just read the sheet and you play the notes one by one on the keyboard. That's the way you start usually. So you try to more or less copy what you read to the keyboard in a very conscious, deliberate way, a slow way basically, in which you just one by one copy these notes. Now, you can imagine that a teacher is explaining what the piece is about, what the various, let's say, bars mean and how they are sort of organized in a meaningful melody or whatever. And in this way the teacher tries to make you familiar with the piece and tries to demonstrate what the structure of the piece is. Then you start to play the piece on the piano step by step. So first one note after the other, then of course a couple of notes together, and then of course the whole melody together in a few bars. And so gradually you build up your mastery of this particular piece. This is a gradual process, and the cognitive stage in the process is the first stage in which you read and play and read and play and read and play in a very conscious way, which takes a lot of effort and is in fact a very slow process. Now, the next step is the associative stage. That is the stage in which you practice and practice and practice and practice. And you bring more speed into performing this particular piece of music. The idea is that you basically organize the separate notes into melodies, as I said, sentences or whatever you call it. And these sentences tend to become automatized. So you can play a particular sentence from the beginning to the end in an automatic way without gradually reducing, let's say, the conscious control. So it becomes an automatic sort of, program. You can play it by heart, and you make a sort of chunk, as it is called, out of this melody, out of this sequence of notes, which are connected into one, let's say, sub-piece of the music you are to perform. And you build these chunks, so you have all kinds of sequences of notes which can be played automatically, and some sequences which cannot be played automatically, which do need prolonged conscious control in order to perform them. These are the more difficult parts, of course, of the piece. So there is a sort of a gradual build up of the complete piece in chunks of automatized sub-pieces which are connected, and gradually you completely automatize the whole piece in one big chunk, and you can perform it automatically without conscious control. During the practice you need feedback both from the teacher and your own feedback as you listen to your own performance, and you try to improve the performance and try to be for instance, more rhythmical, or you try to master particular difficult steps in the piece. So gradually, by using external and internal feedback, you make an automatic program, let's say, of the piece to be performed. That's the associative stage. And then we have the last stage, which is the autonomous stage, which needs further practice because you have now learned to play the piece in your own study room on your own piano, and perhaps you are able to perform it for your friends or relatives or whatever, and then you have to make the step towards the concert hall, the Concertgebouw hall, where you have to play it for an audience of a couple of hundred people. Now that's a big step, and you need further practice in order to be able to master that, let's say, level of performance. And you can in fact perform the piece under various conditions, and you have a sort of flexible mastery of the project, of the whole skill. Now this is the way in which John Anderson actually thought cognitive skills are gradually built up and become automatic, let's say, parts of your repertoire. So these two mechanisms, activating prior knowledge and practice, are important mechanisms in the process of learning. Now we have discussed now the process of learning by making a distinction between rote learning, surface learning, and understanding, deep learning, and we have discussed important mechanisms, in fact practicing and activating prior knowledge as part of the learning process. We can now turn into the issue of transfer.